Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm joined by Leudra, and we're discussing some of the best and worst things that have gone into the game recently. So this is not just limited to the most recent update. However, it will kind of try to limit the area in which or duration that we'll be talking about things. So we're just going to jump into it today. And the best thing to go into the game in terms of amendments or updates to currently existing features recently, in my opinion, is hidden layers. And the reason I really like the hidden layers is because it's really become a group activity. Not that it wasn't before, but people are looking for groups. They're staying in the party. They're going through multiple layers at a time. I've even had some groups segue and go into daily dungeons afterwards. So they do a handful of layers and then they swap to the 3 daily dungeons. It's kind of become an exciting thing to do. Each morning they seem to be more active, and I wish they were more active at night or afternoon for other players as well. But I think that the early morning players in general have really enjoyed them. And Leudra, what do you think is one of the best changes to have gone into existing features?
Yeah, I'll agree with you on the cursed towers thing. That's not the cursed towers thing. The layers thing. That's been a big change. It's nice to be able to farm the regular gens, all in one go rather than having to kind of wait on a day-by-day basis. But I think the other best thing for me is maybe the change to gear. Now that CR is kind of an independent role, it allows for far more build diversity, I found, where you're not always having to be reliant on finding the highest CR piece of gear for the various game modes you're in. Now you can focus more on the secondary magic attributes, whether it be for PvP, PvE, etc. For example, a role such as 5% attack speed is pretty strong in a lot of game modes, but was not viable in the previous gear options, as you had to sacrifice a lot of CR to be able to use that piece. So I think I like the gear changes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, there hasn't been much talk about that. There has been a lot of people talking about, what pieces do I look for, but not many people have really mentioned that with combat rating being less important, you're really able to diversify your character or go in a route that makes your character different than other players of the same class. So,
Yeah, 100%. And then I think it allows for more, like I said, build diversity, and I think it allows for more for classes in particular to maybe stand a little bit more out, as you can use skills that are a little more tailored to your class and your play style than you used to be able to.
yeah, absolutely. So, let's go in the opposite direction now. And the worst changes to go in, I've actually got two here, and I'll talk more about one of them than the other because I feel like one of them might actually be one of the things you have to say. But that is the changes to the accursed towers, specifically them adding more towers. It's difficult for me to see them add more towers in a mode that already has clans avoiding each other. And maybe that's not everywhere, but we transferred from a server. We're now in a new server, and basically everybody just avoids the towers or avoids the conflict, which I have trouble feeling like that was really the intent. The other thing for me is the non Inferno or the Hell difficulty leaderboards. I was really pumped for this change, not because I was planning on staying in those difficulties as an individual who is incredibly active and also has spent on the game. I wanted to move on to the new difficulties, but I was really glad for the people in the community that were going to have their kind of their own brackets and be separated. And it was an opportunity, in my opinion, for it to be implemented and allow players to kind of compete at different levels or brackets, basically, for lack of a better word. However, that's not what we saw. And you may not know this, Ludra, and there may be some people listening that don't know this. However, I think that the people that are aware of it are probably just as kind of upset about it as I am. And that is that separating the leaderboards didn't change as much as we expected. In fact, you can be on a separate leaderboard, but still in the same match when it comes to a battleground. Now, obviously, you can't be in the same challenge rift or anything like that, but the fact that you have your own leaderboard has not separated the players into their own division, so to speak. And that was a really big letdown. And when I started hearing about that, I was kind of just had scratching my head. I was like, what is this? It doesn't really make any sense. Why separate the leaderboards if you're still throwing them into the same player pool? So is there
I,
anything?
I 100% agree with you. I think it's kind of a disappointing. The communication aspect is really disappointing because they give you the patch notes. They don't really explain something like that. So the hype built around potentially having separate queues, if you will, for Inferno and non-Inferno players, I think was something I was really excited for. I was excited for the community that maybe hasn't spent as much as others, and have a little bit of a lower resonance to be able to have more competitive matches, for their individual impacts. So 100% agree with you. It's been disappointing. To dovetail onto that, I think the biggest complaint I have, or biggest disappointment I have, is the stat compression. I think it's had the opposite impact, intended impact and stated impact. where they were trying to create a system, at least they claim they're trying to create a system where lower resonance and higher resonance players are a little bit more closer in relative power. I think I've seen the power gaps increase rather than decrease as a result of the stack compression. And my perspective is that it's because of lethality. Lethality has increased substantially because of the two new additional weapon spots you have, the two new gems that can go in there, the two new awakening spots that can go in there, so on and so forth. The addition of passive crit chance for most classes within your stances, and it's a big difference now, a really big difference, even 10 to 15% gap in resonance. Whereas before, playing at 6,300, 6,400 resonance like I was before the patch, I'd have 2,000 or 3,000 resonance players be able to kind of burst me down, not necessarily burst, but kind of CC me down or be able to handle me one-on-one before I could respond. Now they're kind of deleted before they can even do anything. So it's been a substantial change, and I don't like that for the overall player base, where they state they're trying to decrease the gap in resonance and in stats, but I think it's actually increased.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And in fact, that actually, a lot of that overlaps with some of the responses that I have for the next set of questions. So if anything's kind of repetitive, then we don't need to kind of go over it again. But I think that the next question just kind of makes sense to go into right now. The best part of the new weapon slots for me was actually that a lot of people aren't aware of this, and I'm going to show this on my character screen. When they talked about getting 60% effect from the weapons, it does not mean the attributes or the magic. What it actually means, and it's just a really bad description, it means you're getting 60% of the damage. So they did this so that the scaling of having two new weapons was less severe. And I like this because it is a way of limiting the lethality. Reducing, instead of getting 200% by adding two more weapons, we're getting 120. So I kind of like that they were getting to that point, because I was kind of concerned, the character strength might just get out of control. However, as you said, the lethality is still overall very high. And in fact, just going to 120% is more than we had before. And the lethality before the update was already kind of out of control. So overall, it's just too much. And aside from anything that you've already mentioned, do you have a favorite part of the two new weapon slots? Maybe extra essences or anything along those lines?
My favorite part was going to be the increased build diversity. I might kind of answer the question with maybe a little bit of a disappointment, which is I've come to realize that a lot of the main weapon essences don't allow for a lot of build diversity. There's not a lot of synergy between specific essences that you're able to equip for a lot of builds, at least as it relates to Demon Hunter and Monk that I found, the two classes that I predominantly play. So a lot of times when you want to play a specific build, you might be wanting for a specific essence or a specific ability to be slotted into your main or your offhands, and they just don't exist. Or they conflict with each other and they're not able to be utilized. So you may find yourself with a slot in your main hands or your offhands that just isn't utilized nearly as well as you'd like it to be. Which in fact is kind of a weird nerf to a couple of classes that have one or two specific builds they're really able to be effective with, and therefore they're a little bit left. They're left a little bit underpowered or underserved compared to other classes that do have the essences available for their specific primary builds, where they're able to utilize two essences at the same time rather than just one.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because as somebody who makes a lot of builds myself and then shares them with the community, I've actually been shocked at how many times I've been going over a build and covering it to say, well, I just use this because there really isn't a better choice. Even though I have two more slots, I actually have nothing else to put in here. So it's really been kind of baffling to me to be in that position, because I was super excited about the build diversity or the potential. And then I kind of started thinking about things and realizing, and I haven't been back on Crusader since the change, but Crusader just got their first essence for Punish, something that a lot of Crusaders have been looking for a really long time. Okay, they just refuse to give them an essence for Punish in one of the weapon slots. They finally get one, but they don't have a second one to put in the other slot. So it's like you still, the builds are almost still kind of cookie cutter to a degree, meaning that there isn't as much diversity as you would expect, even with the two additional slots. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And the worst part of the two additional slots is actually something you mentioned on the first topic. For me, it's actually the additional resonance. When I first heard about the new slots having extra gem slots, or excuse me, the two weapon slots having extra gems, I was excited again for some diversity. I was thinking, what gem combinations could we put in here? However, what we ultimately got was the devs knowing that there would be too much resonance. So then we got a resonance compression added in, and that was just kind of a letdown. We did, get blindsided by that. And then it's still favorable to add resonance in those slots. It's not as good, in my opinion, to kind of lower your resonance down. And some of that has to do with the benefit you get from, say, a better legendary gem effect as opposed to the resonance, but also in terms of BG, it seems like the matchmaking values are kind of like locked in place. Some players are experiencing being like stuck in the upper bracket, and they have really no reason to be there. They're several thousand resonance lower than some of the higher players now, if not more in some cases. It seems like maybe the algorithm or the matching is kind of messed up, or it's got some issues since converting into an Inferno. And without getting too far in depth about that, essentially what I'm saying is that if you have the ability to add just sheer resonance to your character, it still seems like that's the best bet, even with the gem or resonance compression. And that's just kind of been a letdown. I would have really preferred to be able to slap more interesting effects in there. So gems kind of like Cure Slaying or something of that nature. However, it just isn't the way it kind of played out, at least not for me.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, I ranked up Mother's Lament thinking that, the extra gem slots would allow me to, have more build diversity and maybe slot some things differently. And I think they really missed a great opportunity here to limit the types of gems you were able to slot into the two new additional slots. Even from a revenue perspective, I think that probably would have created a little bit more of an incentive to increase revenue across the entirety of the player base. If, for example, they said, hey, nothing higher than a 2-star gem is able to be slotted into the defensive stance slots, which candidly would have followed the logic they applied with their stat reduction, their offensive stat reduction, as you just alluded to, with the 60% of their attack of the attack values they have. So they could have gotten away with it with that logic, and I think it would have created an incentive and an interest to spend even higher, not just with whales, but with everybody. And I mean, the build diversity opportunities within 2-star and 1-star gems are just massive. In fact, a lot of their effects and abilities outshine 5-star gems, in my opinion. But the other point that you made, which is spot on, is that resonance still seems like it's king. And it's noticeable even at 8300-ish resonance, which is where I'm playing at now. If somebody's low 9s or higher, it's a pretty big gap, and even though it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I do want to mention Mother's Lament. So I have made mention that I would be testing that, and actually Leudra was going to help me test that. The reason we have held off is actually because at the moment, Mother's Lament is not being affected by beneficial effect duration, and I believe that is an error. I've asked for just some clarification if that was still the case. I haven't gotten a response yet, but I want to make sure that we're testing it and don't have to redo the testing, just so we can kind of get some long-standing, information and go to good advice of whether the gem should be used or how powerful it is and so forth, especially since there's money involved with leveling the gem up. So I just want to kind of announce that for everybody that's listening and been waiting for the Mother's Lament testing. On to the next topic here. The best part of weekly server paragon levels, and what I mean by that for anyone who might not have even noticed so far, if you're a more casual player, you may not have even noticed the changes, but the server paragon level no longer increases by 2 per day. It now increases by 10 at the start of the reset each Monday morning for the week. Now, for me, the best part of this actually doesn't affect me directly. It just kind of affects members of the clan and other friends and stuff that I play with. And it's that it's a lot more casual friendly. You can log in at any point during the week and kind of get caught up in terms of experience. You could miss several days, get on at the weekend, and sure, you miss some of those daily rewards. But in terms of sticking up with the rest of the group in terms of level, you can get caught up relatively quickly in just a couple of days whenever you play during that week. So that's been really nice to see that overall, the players have kind of stayed collectively more as a clump.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's been really nice to be able to grab, the 10 levels or whatever it is on Monday or Tuesday, and then be able to focus on the other activities the game offers throughout the rest of the week. As somebody who doesn't necessarily love the constant grinding aspect at this point of the game, I have no problem grinding for gear or sets or whatever it might be. just to keep up from a level and CR perspective, to be able to get that out of the way within just a day at this point, makes the rest of the week just far more enjoyable, whether it be taking advantage of the new layer system or focusing primarily on PvP, which is what I enjoy. It's taken a lot of the stress away, at least from my gameplay, of making sure that I'm at server paragon or above server paragon.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, interestingly enough, I find it kind of like I'm relearning what I do in the game, as if the day of the week is kind of tied to certain activities, if that makes sense. Because I'm like dumping my battle pass on Monday, I'm getting higher in level, I'm doing things like world farming, trying to get some legendary primary piece upgrades, and then as the week goes on, I'm doing other things, like say I'm participating in some of the events, getting those taken care of. I might be farming dungeons as a priority because I'm not going to get as much experience and level up. So kind of like what I'm doing just shifts. And I kind of like that. In fact, it seems like it's a little more of a rhythm. And if anybody's played other mobile games, a lot of these mobile games have different events by the day, and some of them recur weekly. So it's like Monday might be dungeon day, Tuesday might be world farm day, Wednesday might be set day, and so forth. And it's just like you're doing a different thing each day of the week, and it kind of adds to the overall enjoyment of it. At least for me, I like kind of that routine. For worst part of the weekly server paragon, this one does affect me to some degree, less now than it used to, say, many months ago, but it's really hindering the hardcore players in terms of the people that just like to grind. Okay, there is a percentage of players in the game, although it may be limited. There are some people that just find it very relaxing to just run in circles, grind, farm over and over, and that might be some of the things they enjoy most about the game. And this has almost really ruined their fun entirely. They lose a lot of that motivation and enjoyment when they see numbers like 1% or 5% for experience gained, and some players are hitting these numbers every week now. So that, unfortunately, I don't quite go to that extreme anymore, but I am seeing towards the end of the week some relatively low numbers. 10% I think I've hit every time so far, and at that point I feel like I just knock my dailies out and go into something else. This last week I even covered it in a video about how it kind of just felt like an odd day for people in a similar situation to myself, and I just ended up doing some food prep for the week. So we'll see what I come up with this week for when I get to that point. Do you have a worse aspect of the change?
Yeah, it's going to be similar to what you mentioned. It's the fact that that the hardcore grinders, if you will, or the people that are really dedicated to whether it be running circles or running dungeons, their ability to gain a meaningful advantage from that has been substantially diluted. And while I understand this is primarily a microtransaction pay-to-win game, I've always enjoyed the fact that there was two primary ways to gain an advantage. One was obviously spending, but two was spending the time, putting in the effort with spamming dungeons or spamming open world farm to get those high-end pieces of triple stack gears or whatever it might be. That allowed you to have both a CR advantage as well as a magic attribute advantage. And the normalization, if you will, or kind of bringing everybody to kind of a mean, a relative strength in that aspect is disappointing, because I hate the idea that it's going to the game's going to continue to digress into more of a, you have to buy orbs to gain the power spikes that you're looking for.
I've actually had multiple people make comments on videos saying that they think this was the reason it was done. They think that the change was implemented to force the only way of being to improve or gain more power is through spending. So
it's disappointing, because I'm not sure they think that much in depth, candidly. That there's plenty of other ways to increase revenue. Maybe they're just not thinking of them or looking at them, but I would hope that they'd be looking at different ways to increase revenue than that. I'm hoping that this was done in a altruistic manner, which was to maybe make more casual players not feel so left behind throughout the week, month, year, etc. But they definitely should have left some ways in for those hardcore folks to gain meaningful advantages in their grinding, in their constant grinding.
Yeah, it almost feels like, I know it's not, but I'm thinking about like, how we both feel, and it's like, yeah, the best part is that it's more casual friendly, and the worst part is that it's not friendly to hardcore. So it's like it just didn't quite meet the perfect happy medium. But I think overall, perhaps the intent was good and just needs some sort of tweak. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, 100%. They should re-add something into the game to reward those who want to spend hours farming.
I agree.
That's Diablo. That's the essence of Diablo. And if you're going to pull away from that, then what are you really doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and hopefully we see something to that. So this answer may certainly vary depending on people's interest in PvE or PvP and so forth. But what is the best skill that's been added to each individual class? In my opinion, this is the Necro's Borrowed Time. Obviously, that has a strong PvP influence. And honestly, I've had some comments here that people say, oh, it's only good at high reso. Well, keep in mind that Borrowed Time can be cast by a player of any resonance, and it doesn't have to proc on the individual when they die. An individual Necro can actually apply this to another player. So is it more difficult to get off as a low resonance player? Sure, you could get killed before it does, and then it procs on yourself. But there's still some really good situations in which Necros could kind of take advantage of this in PvP. And I think that is easily the best skill that's been added. I think it was completely unnecessary, and that's a totally different topic. But see how you feel about this one.
I'm gonna go for a twofer here. It's the best skill and it's the worst. I cannot believe they added this skill to the game. I mean, they essentially stole the thunder from barbarians with Undying Rage. They gave it to Necros, who did not need a buff at all. In fact, they needed a nerf more than anything. It's a skill that essentially has broken the way that the Battlegrounds operates. And they made it activate before cheat death. So essentially, you have to kill a Necro twice before their cheat death procs. Then you have to kill them a third time before they actually die. Now, most classes don't have that type of sustainability to sit around and make that happen. A lot of times, the ability for Necros to sustain in Battlegrounds is substantially improved, whether you're low, mid, or high reso. If you're a low or mid reso Necro and you're struggling with, the DOT, it still should keep you alive for about 20 seconds. I think it's 5% max hit points a second it ticks before you kill somebody. But consider casting it on your other whales or your main carry in the game, and it's just as broken as if they're casting it on themselves. But I've seen a substantial uptick in necromancers whose gameplay I respect but don't necessarily think of as top tier. All of a sudden become top tier players just because of this one skill, and it's nothing. It's not taking anything away from them. It's just essentially a mechanic that should not exist in this current Battlegrounds mode, where if you're on defense in particular, the sustainability is substantial as far as halting progress of idols, so on and so forth. And in fact, it's just as valuable on attack because you don't have to go back, run back, and stop your progress of pushing an idol anymore. You can just kind of hang out, burn your borrowed time, and then re-engage the battle while somebody who doesn't have borrowed time has probably died in the meantime. So,
yeah,
a lot more negative thoughts about that. I'll keep it PC though for the purpose of the.
Ironically, with the name, I actually think that this skill was brought out at the wrong time, because Necros have been the top or second best class basically for the entirety of the game, at least in regards to PvP. So the timing of bringing this skill out when they're already strong is kind of in poor taste, in my opinion. And on top of that, they just nerfed Barbarian's Undying Rage not that long ago. So then to just give it a similar ability to another class is also kind of not in great taste. So it's kind of just like a double whammy there, where I feel like they should have come up with the ability of this skill, which has got amazing kind of class lore to it with the effect. And I think it was a really cool idea, and just saved it for a better time is really what I think should have happened here.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think we can overstate how disappointing it is for them to do this to Barbarian. I mean, one of the things that I think is crucial just to not only PvP, but the fun and enjoyment of the game and the lore of the game is each class should be unique. Each class, you should feel like you have a substantially different playstyle, you have a different objective, you have a different identity, if you will. And for them to consolidate identities within Necromancer, both as all as a high DPS, they have the highest mobility, they have the highest survivability. Those are all distinct and unique things that should be separate and unique to individual classes, not all consolidated onto one class. And I would strongly urge those that have more decision-making power than I to reconsider the uniqueness of each class and how they want to leverage that within the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the uniqueness of each class is very important. And I actually, I played World of Warcraft for a few years. I forget exactly, but I want to say probably 3 or 4 years. And the reason I left that game was because it seemed like all the classes were starting to just meld into each other. For example, like a warrior was kind of becoming similar to a rogue, and a ret paladin and a death knight, in terms that they all had like a self heal, they all had a single range ability, they all had an execute. It was just like all the classes. It didn't matter which one you played. They all had the same abilities with different names, and I was like, this just really kind of ruins the identity and just kind of my fantasy about it, you know, and where I didn't feel like invested or just kind of immersed in my character anymore. And I left the entire game because of it. So I think that what you're saying really does a lot more than people sometimes realize.
Now that you bring that up, I mean, do you think that's a result of just longevity of the game, how long the game's been out? And I think potentially developers and game designers, the demand on them to push out new content, because it seems like the easiest way for them to quote unquote push out new content is to push out new legendaries. Now that you brought that up, I'm wondering if they just run out of ideas within the uniquenesses of essences in this game. Yeah, if they're running out of ideas on how to create essences and create skill.
Yeah, it could be. In WoW, I think a lot of it was that, there had been a couple of expansions, so the level cap was higher. So the idea of like starting a new character was less interesting for a lot of people who may not have had time. So then the easiest way to kind of balance things was like, well, if the self heal is overpowered for this class, we'll give it to this class too, and then they're balanced. I think that's so. I think the additional legendaries and essences in this game is an issue as well, and I honestly think it's past the point of being an issue. It's so difficult to find essences you're looking for when you want to get something new or change classes, which actually segues us into our final topic here, which is what is something a lot of people won't know either. And just to share some fun facts here, is that I actually played Demon Hunter for, I believe, the first like 200 paragon levels. So I played nothing other than Demon Hunter, and my first class change was to Monk. And now Leudra has gone much longer than I did. Leudra has gone, had a few day stint as Monk before reverting one time, right? And I think he might have swapped to Barb, played for a couple hours, and then waited 6 days to log in again. But now you've kind of stayed on Monk and gathered some essences, got your essence mastery. So we'll call this kind of your first real class change. So you and I have both essentially played Demon Hunter for a long stretch, yours much longer than mine, and then changed to Monk for the first time. So rather than just saying what the best difference between Monk and Demon Hunter is, I just want to make this kind of a general topic about what's the best part of taking that leap to class change the first time for somebody who may be thinking about doing it now, or perhaps when Shadow Knight comes out this month. And for me, it was just realizing that there was other classes that I enjoyed and actually enjoyed more. Ironically, swapping to Monk was like completely eye-opening to me, because I realized that Monk was a class I absolutely loved. In fact, it's still my favorite PvP class. Crusader's my favorite class in PvE, but I never would have experienced that had I not taken that leap and been willing to kind of refarm the gear again.
Yeah, I think the biggest positive is kind of the hope that comes along with class changing, and it's just even just switching things up. A different perspective on PvP as it relates to classes, your role within Battlegrounds as a different class, and even just getting out of potentially the monotony of what you're doing day in, day out on a specific class in BG and looking at it from a different angle, I think can be extremely helpful and valuable. I still haven't gotten all the essences that I need to maybe have the most optimized PvP build, but now that I've maxed out my essence mastery, I'm actually starting to be able to PvP and not feel completely handicapped, and it's just a different perspective. It's been just really healthy for me, just to gain a better appreciation for Battlegrounds and Demon Hunter's role in it in particular, but also Monk.
Yeah, and the worst part for me is actually a double whammy. It's the combination of having to farm essences, or perhaps not finding the essence that you're looking for, as well as the essence mastery level. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have maxed essence mastery on everything at this point, but certainly I am in a huge minority in terms of that. But whether it's PvE or PvP, there are some essences that get buffs like 90% from the essence mastery, meaning that some of these builds that you might see, even in a video like mine, the build might not be anywhere near effective if it doesn't have that full essence mastery, because 90% is a huge buff to what some of these things do.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, the worst part for sure is the amount of time it takes you after you class transferred to be able to competently do PvE and PvP events. So for me, it was at least a week, maybe a little bit over a week before I'm starting to feel like my relative strength is what it was as a demon hunter, and relative impact in battlegrounds. But I mean, even just like raids, right? Like for a long time, like my ability to impact raids in our warband just wasn't nearly as high as demon hunter, and it still isn't because I'm missing some essences. So I think the general frustration I have is they should figure out a way to reduce the amount of time it takes once you do class transfer to gain your relative strength back. And I don't know if that's just making Essence Mastery essentially transition. So if you've got to rank 4 on one class, make it just go to all the other classes and they just have to find the essences. That would reduce the amount of time substantially. And set items, which it sounds like they're addressing via having strength to int carry over in the next couple patches here.
Yeah, that's actually something I'm in favor of now. I would not have been in favor of that a long time ago. And I talked about that in a video, but to keep it brief, I just think that the game has evolved, right? As the game's been out longer, people continue to play, but they might not play quite as much per day. So even though they're logging in daily, their desire to kind of farm set pieces for strength and int declines, especially with difficulties coming out every 70 levels. So I just feel that that is a change that is kind of overall a positive at this time, but I definitely would not have said that probably 700 levels ago.
I 100% agree. I have the same exact perspective. I think the thing that we wanted to try to avoid was, having the effort that people put into the game essentially not have been worth it at the end of the day. Right? You spend tens of hours farming all of this stuff, and then somebody else can, they make a change and somebody else can gain those same advantages without putting the time in. But the reality is, I mean, you and I both, what do we have into this game? Thousands of hours, if not, thousands of hours probably. I think we've put the time and the effort in that, we can handle being given maybe some Essence Masteries or something like that.
Yeah, and honestly, my biggest fear is that Essence Mastery will have its cap increased without any kind of change, like you're saying, whether it be some of it converts or maybe Essence Mastery is a total across all characters, or even if you just got some sort of system where, like, if you had Essence Mastery level 10 on one class, then all other classes were raised to at least 5, if that makes sense. So that, like, you'd still have to do some time farming on a different class, but at least you're not starting from 1 if you choose to play that class for the first time after a cap gets raised. Because right now, I just can't imagine if you haven't started working your way through other classes for fun or just with this in mind, and then at some point it interests you, you're kind of like, well, I guess I don't do anything competitive or serious for, a month now.
Right. That sounds like a good compromise, actually.
So, well, thank you very much for the amount of time here. This is a fairly lengthy conversation for this type of video, and I'm sure that a lot of people are grateful as well just to hear another voice on a video other than mine. So Leudra is co-leader of our clan, Modest, for anybody who's unaware, and we've been playing together essentially since the very start of the game, other than, I don't know, a handful of weeks before the first Immortal Reign, I guess. So we've been doing everything pretty much as a tandem, and we have had some great officers as well with us in our stay. So again, thanks for the time. As always, thank you everybody for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.
Thanks, Lita.
Thank you.